Welcome to Your Health is Your Wealth. My name is Argo Duenas, and I'm your host for today. I'm also the owner of Back to Nature Health and Wellness Center, a local center that has served the Baltimore, D.C., Virginia area for over 30 years. The mission of this program is not only to share vital health information, but to also present positive images and inspiring interviews. I have as my very, very special guest today, and I'm truly honored and humbled that he's here. He's taken off from his busy, busy job at Washington to be here with me today. Dr. Gomez, thank you so much.
Thank you for the welcome.
Dr. Gomez is the assistant professor at the Howard University School of Medicine, and he's here today on a mission. He's a man truly on a mission with a purpose. And he's here today to share his journey, his life, his story, his passion, and his purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a tall order, Argo. I'm going to do my best to live up to it.
Well, first of all, Dr. Gomez, you are now living in Annapolis, right?
I am.
You've been here for about 6 years.
Yep.
How do you like living in Annapolis?
I love it. It's my adoptive hometown.
Okay.
I came to Annapolis because I refused to live in Delaware.
Oh.
My first job was actually at a hospital in Delaware when I relocated here. I'm originally from New York City.
All right.
So when I looked around and I looked at options, I really couldn't afford Baltimore or DC, so friends had advised, hey, maybe you should take a look at Annapolis. And the more time I spent here, the more I loved it, so I decided to stay.
Well, it's been 6 years since you've been here, right?
Yeah.
And you have truly, truly blessed this community with your energy and your community activism. But before we talk about your community activism and your advocacy for economic and health disparities, let's talk about your childhood, where you came from, your family, your mentors, your education, and perhaps your religious upbringing.
Okay.
So we can get a real good feel for you, Doc.
All right. So my family emigrated here from Cuba in 1966. And I grew up in and around New York City. Grew up in a town called West New York, which is just across the Hudson from Manhattan. And the environment that I grew up in was an immigrant community, a relatively poor part of town.
Okay.
And we lived in a 5th-story walk-up, tenement apartment.
Wow.
And my mom was a sweatshop mender. And my dad worked on the docks in Newark. So that's sort of where it all started. The experience was very interesting because there were various waves of immigrant groups
Right.
that had come through West New York. We were the Cuban immigrant group.
Right.
But the town was majority white, and most of the Cuban immigrants were also white, which made for an interesting challenge.
Right.
So I ended up growing up and identifying as a black man in America, which is a pretty common experience for Caribbean Americans.
Right.
And listened to a lot of R&B and
Right.
funk music as a kid.
What about your cultural background? Like, I like Afro-Cuban music, you
Right.
know, the food, you know. So that was also, how did you assimilate and integrate that into your community?
Right. So interestingly, Afro-Cuban culture in my community wasn't elevated that much. The food is our food.
Right,
the
right,
Creole
right.
food is just the nature of Cuban food. The music, as wonderful as it is there's traditional music, but there's a rather small sliver of it that pays homage to African roots. Most of it is actually running away from that heritage and then in denial of that heritage.
How did that affect your self-esteem?
So that was a pretty big challenge. I found that that community was less accepting of my, racial background than American culture
Right.
was.
Wow.
I mean, that town had seen waves of immigrant, Italian, Irish, Jewish, through various, world events
Right.
that led that kind of working class town to welcome different working class first generation Americans. And although there was a good degree of suspicion between those groups, and a certain sort of disparagement of the last minority to arrive,
Right.
I found that in part because America had matured through some other eras, including civil rights,
Right. Right.
that it was more welcoming than my own community.
Wow. How did you get out? And what inspired you to become a doctor?
So those are kind of related, but not exactly the same thing. So my goal definitely was to get out from the time I was a kid.
Right.
A lot of the kids that I grew up with, we didn't come from means, so we didn't expect to be able to get out unless we did through, say, sport or something like that, where you
Right.
get a college scholarship.
Right.
Actually, during my time in high school, one of my guidance counselors advised, I've taken a look at your transcript, and I think you'd be better material for like technical school rather than four-year university. And
Wow.
I went to my homeroom teacher,
That's interesting.
which happened to be a Black American woman, Miss Patterson, Brenda Patterson, and she said, "Well, that's nonsense. You're going to go to college." And I said, "Well, I don't have any money to go to college, so I don't really think it's even worthwhile trying to, make a plan for applying. What I'll do is I'll drop out and write." I'd already been reading Ralph Ellison, Amiri
Wow.
Baraka, Richard Wright, and I just figured that's what I'm going to do.
So your consciousness was already elevated, really. If you're reading Richard Wright and
Yeah.
Ralph Ellison.
I think I was doing it to try to heal myself and to find mentors
Right.
and people to look up to,
Right.
where it
Okay.
was absent in the rest of my
Right.
childhood.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So let's fast forward now. So you get out, and what was the defining moment that led you into going into medical school?
So that comes out of the fact that these couple of teachers just
Yes.
decided to be mentors and
Right.
said, you fill out the applications, we'll send them in.
Okay.
And I sent it into a bunch of schools.
Okay.
Cornell University happened to have had a program to try to recruit economically disadvantaged kids that seemed promising.
Right. Right.
And so I kind of ran away to college because we didn't have the economy to sustain it.
Right.
And then while there, I was interested in everything. I went to was in the arts and sciences school,
Okay.
college, and was interested in art and literature.
This was in New York.
This is upstate New York and
Right.
Cornell.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so
So you got a well-rounded education, liberal
I did.
education. Yes, you
I did. And in fact, it was a requirement of the college.
Right. Okay.
And I was very lucky to do that. Majored in biochemistry.
Right. Okay.
And from there, I got into research first. And that eventually led to medical school.
Okay. So from there, let's move a little forward. You went to Chicago, to Boston, into Miami. I'm chronicling your journey now.
All right.
So,
Yeah, so I went through, first of all, I got a research tech position at Mass General Hospital in the endocrine department. And two of the individuals that I was working under had attended Mount Sinai School of Medicine in New York City.
Okay.
I was attending night school at Harvard, trying to figure out how to get into PhD.
Okay.
And they said, look, this is going to take you forever. Just be reasonable.
Right,
You
right.
go to medical school, you want to do human research anyway.
Okay.
Just do that and then come back here and you can do research all you want.
Okay.
So, in fact, from the second I got there, I got interested in emergency medicine. And Ended up doing internship in medicine at Boston University first. So I went back to Boston, where I'd been. And then from there, had matched in emergency medicine program at University of Chicago. So I lived there for a couple of years.
Right.
My family had most entirely relocated to Miami, Florida.
Okay. So
And
you have 3 children.
I have 3 children.
Right. Okay.
Right. So
You go to Florida.
we go to Florida and spent some years there, did some teaching, taught in the bioethics program at University of Miami.
Okay.
And that eventually led to those kids growing up and electing to go to college here in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
One graduated from GW a couple of years ago, and the other one from Catholic University.
Okay.
And I was very lucky.
And what are their career fields?
Right. So the eldest that went to GW is international affairs
Okay.
at the Elliott School,
Okay.
and my daughter was media and journalism
Wow.
at
Okay.
Catholic University,
Okay.
and is now.
Are they still in the area?
Right. So they live with me, and they are interning in Washington, D.C. In various different jobs, trying to break into the job world.
Right. Well, you're a good father, and you're a
Thank
good
you.
role model. And they say the apples don't fall too far from the tree. So this is a problem that we're having in our communities,
Yeah.
with having great role models, fathers being in the homes, single moms raising children. It creates a lot of stress in our lives.
Yeah.
I've experienced that myself. And so we're here today also to talk about stress and how it impacts our well-being. You wrote several articles. It was on Facebook. And honestly, Dr. Gomez, it really got my attention. It really made me think because you brought up some points that I don't think people really sit back and, give some attention to.
Yeah.
Because we're always in that fight or flight mode every day. Am I right?
Absolutely. We deal with a lot of
Trying
stress.
to pay the rent, trying to pay the mortgage, going to school. It's a lot of stress and a lot of angst and a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression. I have young people every day coming into my office who are literally on not only blood pressure medicine, but they're on diabetic medication.
Right.
They're on anxiety meds. They're stressed out. And it is now translating into health issues like diabetes, obesity, heart attacks, cancer. You wrote this article, and it said that we all know obesity leads to diabetes, hypertension, heart attacks, strokes, and not surprisingly, early death at a disproportionately high rate in Black, Hispanic, and other minority communities.
Yeah.
But did you know that these diseases and behaviors such as overeating and obesity are also responses to stress? If our society is to realize equity in health, we're going to have to stop denying root causes such as racism and oppression.
Right.
Please elaborate on that.
So yeah, Argo, we all deal with stress, and folks are all subject to neuroendocrine physiologic manifestations of that stress in a variety of ways. It affects us in every way.
Right.
It affects our ability to learn. It affects our ability to heal. It affects our ability to live normal life, make good life choices, including dietary choices that are positive. Our society has a tendency to blame the victims and say that it's poor choices or manifestation of their own design, when in fact institutionalized racism and oppression pushes people towards bad choices, leaves them limited choices. Interpersonal relationships push them into bad choices and depression and isolation and lack of self-esteem. So racism operates on a lot of levels, and really the only one we have much control over is our internalized racism. And that's a big order to try to overcome that. But through the years, that's what I've tried to share with kids that I've tried to mentor. It's mostly through sport, that they need to find ways to cope and to not believe or internalize the hatred and the hurt.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because it makes us sick on a lot of levels. It makes us prematurely, die prematurely, have higher rates of cancer,
Yes.
have more complications during birth for young mothers.
Right.
So a bevy of medical manifestations and psychological manifestations of this type of stress.
What? How can we reduce? But before we talk about that, reducing stress, because I know in a previous conversation you were sharing with me also that there's been implicit and explicit bias in your field as a doctor.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah.
You want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So,
and what does that mean? For the average person, implicit, explicit bias. What does that mean?
well, let me give you illustrations.
Yes, please do.
So, as a medical student, there was a class I was particularly interested in gastroenterology, and there were a couple of questions with regard to the subject matter, and the professor that was teaching the class.
Right.
I don't think he felt comfortable that the black student in the class kept answering the question right. And he turned to me and he said, look, all you need to do is memorize valine 6 on chromosome 11. And, I knew what it meant. It's coded language. Okay. It's actually a dog whistle type message, because what he's referring to is sickle cell anemia.
Okay.
As if the only thing that I needed to focus on was sickle cell anemia and leave the rest to everyone else.
Wow.
That's an example.
Right.
How you can do it. Another example is, as a resident, I wanted to do a project on cultural dissonance and how we could serve our patients better by understanding their language, understanding the context in which they find themselves, or social stressors that they experience.
Right.
And the mentors, the professors on the staff, said, look, no one here knows what you're talking about. Wow. We think you might have a chip on your shoulder.
Wow.
With this constant concern. When I got to as I went through residency, I got that with peers, and I've gotten it. I've gotten that type of response professionally as well. Yeah.
So, how were you able to handle it and cope with it, instead of internalizing it? And what did you do about it?
So, many years of going through it from the time you're 4 helps you figure out ways to survive. I still think it's a drain on all of us, myself included.
Right.
But the ways are myriad. One of the ways that I do it is the work that I do organizing in the community is a way to feel empowered.
Right.
Teaching other people that this is out there and communicating it is a way to feel empowered and to feel strengthened.
Absolutely.
To be able to go on and carry it on.
Well, I've had some experiences myself in the medical field with doctors who were just out and out overt with their racism.
Yeah.
This was especially in the military. I worked with all men, and I was in high-frequency console radar systems, okay?
Yeah.
I went to school with all men. My duty station was with all men. This was in 1978 in Germany. So there was racism, sexism, sexual harassment, and I was under so much stress because of all of the toxic masculinity and the negative energy coming towards me. I really got sick. I started having a lot of female problems, heavy bleeding, okay, I go to the doctors, they do a sonogram. And this doctor, he was a young major, he looked me straight in my eyes and he said, you have a mass, and the only thing we can do is cut your belly open and see where it is. If not, you'll die.
It sounds like the worst kind of bedside manner I've ever heard of. But
that took me into deep depression. Well, we're talking about stress now and depression and anxiety. Did you know? That affected me deeply.
Yeah, that sounds masculine dismissiveness is a big part of that as well in your case.
But would he have spoken like that to an officer's wife?
Yeah, good point.
You know, would he have treated her that way?
Good point. I think there is a certain amount of disrespect that attends folks when they're not when they don't identify with the patient,
right? And
it leads to medical mistrust.
Absolutely.
Of poorer communities and underrepresented communities, and so yeah, it's a rather
institutionalized.
Absolutely,
it's in all systems. I've worked for the government. I've worked in private industry. I've worked for and it's subtle. In some cases, it's very overt. And as you say, as a person of color, you have to learn how to navigate. And not internalize and transmute that energy. If not, you're going to die. I've had young people come in and complain of making six digits, but very stressed out on their job.
Yeah.
Here's another article that you wrote. You said, let me put my glasses on now, Doc.
I got that too, by the way.
Okay.
That's why I didn't bring any reading material.
Racism and discrimination makes us sick, and our healthcare system fails to address it. Despite claims to the contrary, implicit and explicit racism continues to pervade our U.S. healthcare system, from medical, nursing, public health, school training, to hospitals, third-party payers, and administrators of every stripe. Discrimination and racism does this exponentially, exacerbating the chronic stress responses that we experience every day. You said your goal is to rally your peers to join you in supporting radical reform that allows equitable access to health care for all.
Yeah.
Would you elaborate on that?
Sure. I recently joined the board of the American Academy of Emergency Medicine, and part of my goal there is to carry on the work I've been doing with the Committee on Diversity and Inclusion within the American Academy. I chair that. My hope is to bring people into the fold of all backgrounds, to create an awareness and an inertia to make people understand that it's not just a matter of stating there's this institutionalized racism that's far away.
Right.
We are actually perpetuating the same problem by not recognizing it exists. So we need to sensitize ourselves to how we are overtly and implicitly biased and internally biased, and how we project that, and how we don't recognize that a black woman with chest discomfort isn't emotional or hysterical, but that they may be having a heart attack.
Absolutely.
And and that we offer the same services to people without having this barrier created when we see someone who we assume shouldn't have the same level of care and same level of respect.
Absolutely, absolutely. Another experience that I had, I'm just being very transparent because I have nothing to hide at this point in my life. It was right here in Annapolis. I might have been maybe 21, 22. I left Crownsville State Hospital. I went to a nursing program. I didn't see a lot of health and wellness there. My job was to administer toxic antidepressants like Thorazine, Haldol, Mellaril, Elavil. But it was so toxic that many of those patients went into stupors, like catatonic stupors. And I began to speak out against the system and advocate for the patients. So,
Yeah.
they saw me as a threat, It got to the point where I was very young. I knew in my heart and soul it had to be a more natural way to healing. So I decided either I'm part of the problem or I'm part of the solution. I cannot do this anymore. I can't give them those drugs anymore. So I left. 2 years later, an Evening Capital reporter admitted himself to the hospital as a patient and exposed Crownsville and what was happening. There were doctors there moonlighting. I had a patient that needed an emergency tracheotomy.
Yeah.
Okay. The OD doctor wasn't there. He was out doing something else off grounds. It was very, very bad there for those patients. And many of them were people of color. A lot of experimentations before I came, there was frontal lobotomies done there and ECTs done there. But I left. So when I left, my family thought I was crazy to leave my good government job and just leave and be a single mom. How are you going to take care of your daughter? How are you going to go to school? Well, something happened. I got unemployment. I didn't have any medical insurance. I got pregnant. I had a miscarriage at home. I got very ill. My fingernails turned blue. Obviously, I must have developed a very bad infection. I went to get a medical card and was treated like, why are you here? I'm a taxpayer. I've worked all my life. This is an entitlement that I'm entitled to. I go to a GYN doctor, very, very inconsiderate. The exam was so devastating, I had to call a taxi to go home.
So a lot there.
So look, after that, I never had another child. I should have been given a DNC. When I look back at my situation, he should have put me in the hospital. But obviously, that didn't happen because.
So that's one of the things that that I'm trying to make people sensitize my peers to, is that we offer services differentially.
Right.
But a lot there, Argo. I mean, very courageous of you to take the position of leaving rather than staying and enduring a situation that was unjust and inherently unfair. I've had to do that myself. You notice when we started talking, as we often do, I kind of laughed.
Right.
That is one of the coping mechanisms that we use just to keep from crying.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely intolerable, unconscionable, and it needs to change.
Well, my videographer says I only have 2 minutes left. So, with that being said, what are some things that we can do on a daily basis, Dr. Gomez, to reduce the stress and the angst and the anxiety and the depression? What can we do?
So one of the things we can do is we can be kind to one another. We can respect one another in the way that other people do not. This Friday we have an event at the Bates Legacy Center, The Power to Heal.
Right.
Please come. I urge everyone in the community to be a part of that. I'll be on the speakers panel for that. And every opportunity we can to empower ourselves and to value ourselves and respect one another and include one another equally in a fair way. Those are all opportunities to heal.
So on a personal level, can we go hiking? Can we go down by the water? Can we listen to meditation? Those are some of the things that really helps me. Sometimes you just have to have a staycation, as some of my clients say, get out of the box or get off of the grid, go to the mountains.
And I'm a huge fan of nature and peace.
I know.
Stay away from the metropolis and find some time to heal.
One final, I think we got maybe a couple minutes. Any final comments you'd like to offer to our viewers?
I think we've covered a lot of ground, and I think that you don't have to be a physician to take these initiatives. You don't have to have a background, a technical background. Give yourself time and space, and consider your peace, your inner peace, your emotional state, and be kind to yourself.
With that being said, thank you for being my very special guest today.
Thank you for having me,
May God
Margo.
continue to bless and keep you.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. And remember, in this very present moment, we do have the power to take charge of our life and our health and make it a great day.